I stood on the church steps for a long time before I went in. The sky was gray, and the wind kept picking up my white coat, flapping it like it didn't belong. Maybe it didn't. I hadn't been back in Edison Falls in over 15 years. Not since the night I walked out and never looked back. My name is Grace Donovan. I'm 41 years old. I'm a trauma surgeon, one of the best, I'm told. I've operated in war zones and disaster sites, and nothing has ever made my hands shake. But standing outside Dr. Malcolm Avery's funeral? That did. Inside, the chapel was already packed. Malcolm had been loved by most people. Not by the ones in the front row, though. My parents, my younger brother Colin. My father sat straight-backed, stone-faced as always. My mother dabbed her eyes in slow, practiced motions. Colin looked bored, like he was sitting through a meeting he didn't want to be in. No one looked back. Not once. I slipped in through the side aisle and stood near the back. I didn't take off my coat, I didn't try to sit. I just stood like an afterthought, like a ghost in a room full of people pretending they hadn't buried me a long time ago. The man giving the eulogy, a family friend, some lawyer I vaguely remembered, talked about Malcolm's commitment to family, his generosity, his impact. There was a slideshow, laughter, murmurs of agreement, but no mention of me. Not once. He was a godfather to many, but he had one special godchild, the man said. My heart caught. A complicated relationship, tragically distant in recent years. She was like a daughter to him once, but she's no longer in the picture. My stomach turned. They had erased me. My parents sat there nodding solemnly. Colin leaned over and whispered something to my mother. She smiled. They all knew I was there. I saw Colin glance my way once, then immediately look past me, like I was a window. I didn't even get a nod. Just silence. And that damn coat whispering at my ankles. After the service, I didn't bother joining the line of mourners. I stepped outside into the cold. Two women I didn't recognize were standing nearby, talking in hushed voices. Surprised the estate went to the Donovans, one said. Weren't they estranged? The family said she disappeared, the other replied. Something about a falling out. They said she abandoned Malcolm, that's why they're getting everything. I turned, but they had already moved on. The Donovans, my family, the same people who hadn't spoken to Malcolm in years unless they needed something. And now they were the ones inheriting his home, his practice, his legacy. I clenched my jaw. Something was wrong. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just a surgeon. I was Malcolm Avery's goddaughter, and I was going to find out the truth. I let myself into Malcolm's townhouse just after 9 that night. The key still worked. No one had changed the locks, not yet. The place smelled like old paper and dust, exactly how I remembered it. The lights buzzed when I flipped the switch in the front hall, casting long shadows over the rows of bookshelves and medical journals. Everything was just how he left it. Except him. I dropped my bag by the door and stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. Then I walked toward the study. That room had always been our place, mine and Malcolm's. When I was 16 and desperate to escape the tension in my parents' house, I'd sit in the chair by his desk while he reviewed surgical notes or read obscure journals no one else had patience for. He kept my school photo frame next to a fossilized seashell. He said both reminded him of potential. The photo was still there, but the chair looked smaller now, the whole house did. I opened the drawers of his desk, not really sure what I was looking for. I just needed to be close to something real. A piece of him. The bottom drawer stuck, but when I yanked it open, a stack of medical journals slid forward. One fell out. The Journal of Field Medicine, February issue, dog-eared and cracked along the spine. I picked it up and felt something shift inside, literally. A piece of folded paper was tucked into the center, between 2 pages. I unfolded it. My name was on the front, in his handwriting. Grace. Read this if something happens to me and things don't go how we planned. I sank into the desk chair, heart thudding in my ears. The letter was short, just 1 page, but I read it 3 times. You were always my family, Grace. Not by blood, but by choice. I've updated my will to leave you the townhouse, the clinic, and the funds for the Avery scholarship we dreamed up. Don't let them twist what we built. If anything changes, if anything feels off, follow your gut. You always had a surgeon's instincts. Use them. It was dated 7 months ago, signed with his usual scrawl, bold, uneven, familiar. I sat there staring at the letter until the words blurred. Then I reached for the folder I had seen earlier on the kitchen counter. It was labeled Estate Final Copy. Inside was the new will, filed and notarized less than 3 weeks ago. It named my father as the executor, Colin and my mother as primary beneficiaries. Not a single mention of me. I pulled the signature page to the light and compared it to the one on the letter. The name was the same, Malcolm R. Avery, but the handwriting? It wasn't his. Too clean, too smooth, too careful. I'd seen Malcolm's signature 100 times, on prescriptions, on recommendation letters, on the forms he filled out to help me get into Johns Hopkins. And this wasn't it. My pulse kicked up, my hands steadied, not from fear, but from something sharper, something surgical. Grief, betrayal, suspicion. They all pooled in the pit of my stomach, but I pushed them down. I knew what I was looking at. Someone forged his signature. And they didn't just want his house, they wanted everything. By morning, I was already on my third cup of coffee and a list of names was open on Malcolm's kitchen table. The night before, I'd scanned the forged will, photographed the letter, and backed everything up to an encrypted folder. I wasn't taking chances. Now I was doing what I'd learned to do in operating rooms halfway across the world: triage the damage, prioritize the bleeding. I called Serena first. She was a contract lawyer I'd treated after a car crash in Guatemala, a collapsed lung, 3 broken ribs. I'd stood beside her in the operating room for 5 hours. She owed me her life. Now I needed her expertise. "Grace Donovan," she said after 2 rings. "You saving lives before breakfast again?" "Not today," I said. "Today I'm chasing a forged will." There was a pause. Then, "I'm listening." I told her about the letter, the fake signature, the new will that cut me out entirely. I kept my voice steady, clinical. She asked me to send the files. I did. 10 minutes later, she called back. "Grace, this is bad." Define bad. "The lawyer listed as filing the will, T.W. Morgan, doesn't exist. Not in the state bar registry. Not in any legal directories I can find." I blinked. "What do you mean doesn't exist?" "I mean the name is either fake or belongs to someone who's been dead for decades. There's no active license, no business address, nothing." The paper in front of me blurred for a second. "Whoever submitted that will," she continued, "used a ghost." "That's a felony." I rubbed my eyes. "How fast can you get here?" "I'll clear my schedule." I hung up, then opened the county records database on my laptop. It wasn't hard to find the transfer filings. Malcolm's clinic had officially changed hands the day after his funeral. His townhouse? Same thing. The documents had all been processed within 24 hours of his death. Too fast. Way too fast. No one moves an estate that size without waiting at least a week. Especially not when there's a godchild named in a previous will. Unless you wanted to cover your tracks before anyone noticed. I called an old friend from a surgical outreach program, Marcus, who now worked in financial forensics at a nonprofit that tracks stolen aid money. "Can I ask a favor?" I said. "You want to find something or someone?" "Both," I said. "I need to know if there's been any recent large asset activity in or around Edison Falls. New loans, suspicious property transactions, anything tied to the Donovans. Send me what you've got." I did. An hour later, he called back. "Grace, you were right." "What did you find?" "Your brother, Colin, has taken out multiple short-term loans in the past year. 2 of them defaulted. He owes at least one private lender close to 80 grand. That's not including his personal credit lines, which are maxed." I exhaled. "And my parents?" "Well, here's the interesting part. About 3 weeks ago, they purchased a vacation property in Hilton Head, paid in cash. Photos just hit the real estate registry." I stared at the wall, blinking. "They bought a villa? Worth over 700 grand. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. "Grace," he added quietly, "none of this makes sense unless they knew the money was coming. This was planned." "Yeah," I said, my voice like glass. "It was." I hung up and stared down at the signature again. The fake lawyer, the time-stamped filings, the sudden property grab. This wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. And I was going to make sure every last one of them paid for it. Not out of vengeance, out of principle. I saved lives for a living. Now I was going to save a legacy. It had been 5 days since the funeral, and the wind in Edison Falls had taken on that restless March chill, the kind that always reminded me of late-night hospital corridors and adrenaline. I parked behind the regional hospital and walked in through the side entrance. The security guard didn't recognize me. I didn't expect him to. I wasn't Grace Donovan, local girl anymore. I was Dr. Donovan, back from the dead. Dr. Lena Barron's office was tucked away in the administrative wing, past the old ICU where Malcolm used to make his 3 a.m. rounds. I knocked once, then opened the door. She looked up from her laptop, glasses sliding halfway down her nose. Well, if it isn't the prodigal daughter? I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Hi, Lena. She stood and pulled me into a brief, warm hug. Her arms were thinner than I remembered, but her voice still had that steady, no bullshit tone that once terrified half the interns in the building. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Sit, talk. I handed her the letter first. She read it in silence. Then, the will. She took her time, flipping through each page slowly. When she finally looked up, her expression had shifted. Less curiosity, more resolve. This is a mess, she said, but it's a fixable one. I know the signature's forged, I said. The lawyer doesn't exist. The asset transfers happened too fast. Colin's in debt. My parents suddenly own property that costs 3 times their net worth. Lena tapped the letter with her index finger. This proves intent. Malcolm was clear. He wanted everything to go to you. That scholarship fund? We talked about it before he got sick. He called it your legacy. I felt something tighten in my throat, but I swallowed it. I've got a lawyer coming in, I said. Probate specialist, someone I trust. Lena nodded. Good, because this will go public, Grace, and your family will fight back. They'll make it ugly. They already did, I said. I just didn't see it soon enough. She leaned back in her chair. I've sat on ethics committees, I've overseen disputed estates. But this is personal. They stole from a dying man who raised you like his own child. I looked down at my hands, steady, open, the way they always were before surgery. I'm not doing this for revenge, I said. I just want the truth on record. I want his name and mine to mean something again. Lena stood and crossed to a tall filing cabinet. She pulled out a folder, thin but official looking, and handed it to me. Then let's get you prepared. Inside was a roadmap. Court dates, documentation templates, character affidavits, steps to challenge a fraudulent will. Everything laid out with the kind of precision Malcolm would have admired. As I stood to leave, Lena touched my arm. You're not just a doctor, Grace, she said. You're the woman who never backed down from a dying child. This? She nodded toward the papers. This is easier. For the first time in days, I let myself believe she might be right. The courthouse in Edison Falls hadn't changed. Same beige bricks, same peeling bench paint outside the entrance. I parked on the far end of the lot and sat in the car for a minute, watching the early crowd trickle in. Attorneys juggling coffee cups and file boxes, a bailiff chewing gum like he was late for breakfast. I wore my white coat, not for show, not as armor, because that's who I am. Malcolm always said a white coat doesn't just mark a doctor, it marks a choice. That no matter what chaos you walk into, you walk in as yourself. Inside, courtroom B was already filling up. My parents sat up front, my mother in pearls, my father in the kind of suit he only wore for church or tax season. Colin sat beside them, flipping through his phone, barely glancing up. Their lawyer was the kind of man you hire for appearances. Sharp tie, slick hair, voice like wet velvet. He looked like he belonged in a commercial about saving your family from foreclosure. He didn't look at me. None of them did. I sat alone on the opposite side, my coat folded across my lap, a single folder in my hands. Lena sat 2 rows behind me, silent, steady. Serena, my attorney, stood off to the side reviewing her notes. No one greeted me. No one nodded. I was invisible again. The judge entered a few minutes later. Honorable Walter Leary, retired Army medic, rumored to be hard on sloppy paperwork and allergic to theatrics. I liked him already. The opposing lawyer rose first. Your Honor, he began smoothly, this case is rooted not in fraud, but in grief. My clients, the Donovans, had a long, complicated relationship with the late Dr. Malcolm Avery. Despite certain misunderstandings, he chose to entrust his estate to his goddaughter's family. Grace Donovan, he turned to gesture vaguely toward me, has been absent for over 15 years. She had no involvement in Dr. Avery's final years. She distanced herself by choice. I said nothing. He continued, we acknowledge Dr. Avery once shared a close bond with Miss Donovan, but relationships change. His final will, signed and filed by a licensed attorney. He wasn't licensed, Serena cut in. We'll address that, the judge said calmly. The lawyer pressed on. Miss Donovan is understandably emotional, but this is not about emotion. It's about legal facts. Dr. Avery updated his estate. He left everything to the Donovans. That decision should be honored. He sat down like he'd just pitched a flawless case. My mother leaned toward her lawyer, whispering with a little satisfied smile. My father looked like a statue. And then Colin laughed, quiet, smug, shaking his head like this was already over. When the judge turned to Serena, she stood and said, "My client will speak for herself." I stood slowly, the folder still in my hands. I didn't look at my family. I looked at the judge. My name is Grace Donovan. I was raised in this town, in that man's house, by a mentor who treated me like I mattered. I may have left 15 years ago, but I never stopped being his goddaughter. And I never stopped honoring the promise we made to carry his legacy forward. I paused, letting the quiet sit for a moment. The version of events you just heard? That's a performance. But what I have is the truth. Serena reached up and tapped the folder. I nodded and sat down. The judge looked over his glasses at me. "You may proceed, Miss Donovan." I could feel every eye in the room pressing down. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to restore what had been stolen, and I wasn't walking out until I did. I stood slowly, the folder still in my hands. My white coat brushed the side of the table as I stepped forward. No one moved, not even Colin. "I'd like to start," I said to the judge, "with what's real." I walked to the center of the room and opened the folder. This is a letter written by Dr. Malcolm Avery in his own hand, dated 7 months ago. It was hidden in a medical journal at his home. He wrote it to me in case something happened. I handed a copy to the clerk, who passed it up to the bench. He names me as the intended heir to his townhouse, his practice, and the scholarship fund we dreamed of creating together. Not my family. Me. I looked directly at the judge, but my voice stayed calm. He raised me. When I didn't have a safe place to go, he gave me one. When I was 16 and wanted to drop out of school, he sat with me night after night until I passed chemistry. When I got my residency in Baltimore, he packed my car and cried like a father sending his daughter to college. The judge unfolded the letter and read silently. His brow furrowed slightly. "Now," I continued, "this is the will that was filed 3 weeks ago." I lifted the second document. It names my family as sole heirs. It was filed less than 24 hours after his death. I stepped forward again and pointed to the signature line. That is not his handwriting. I clicked a remote Serena had handed me, and behind me, the court projector lit up with side-by-side comparisons. Malcolm's actual signature, from old prescriptions, licensing forms, handwritten notes, and the one on the will. Malcolm Avery had an essential tremor. Minor, but consistent. His signature always slanted, always dipped slightly at the tail. This one? Too smooth, no drop, no shake, no curve. I heard a faint shift behind me, my mother's jaw tightening. I consulted 2 forensic handwriting analysts. Both flagged the signature as inconsistent. I took a breath. And the attorney listed on the will, T.W. Morgan? He doesn't exist in the state's bar registry. We checked every variation. Nothing. The name is a ghost. I looked at Colin for the first time. He stared at me with something between rage and panic. I turned back to the judge. In addition to that, financial records show my brother, Colin Donovan, took out multiple high-risk loans in the months before Malcolm's death. My parents, who've never owned property outside this county, paid cash for a villa in Hilton Head 3 weeks ago. I let the silence stretch for a moment. It's not just unethical, Your Honor, it's theft. They exploited a dying man's illness, they forged documents, they cut out the only person he trusted, not because of love, because of greed. The judge looked up from the letter, expression unreadable. And then something unexpected happened. In the back of the room, someone stood, a nurse, then another, then 2 doctors, people from the hospital where Malcolm had worked for decades, where I had trained, where we had once dreamed up the Avery Fellowship late one night on a whiteboard covered in anatomy sketches. They rose without a word. No applause. No spectacle. Just silent, unmistakable support. I didn't cry, but I felt something crack open in my chest. The judge looked back at me, then at the letter in his hands, and for the first time since the funeral, I saw Malcolm's name being treated like it mattered, like it still meant something, like we both did. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the soft tap of the judge's pen against his notepad. He stared at the letter for a long time, long enough for Colin to start shifting in his seat and for my mother to clutch her purse like it might carry her out of the room. When Judge Leary finally looked up, he didn't speak right away. His gaze swept the room, past the spectators, the lawyers, the silent cluster of nurses behind me, until it landed back on me. "This court," he said, voice steady and unhurried, "finds the most recent will filed under the name of T.W. Morgan to be fraudulent and therefore inadmissible." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam a gavel. He just let the words land like a scalpel. Quiet, deliberate, irreversible. The estate of Dr. Malcolm Avery will revert to the prior valid documentation, which names Miss Grace Donovan as the sole beneficiary of the townhouse, private practice, and associated scholarship assets. The air left my lungs in one long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Furthermore, the judge continued, this court is referring the matter to the district attorney for investigation into potential fraud, forgery, and misrepresentation involving the Donovan family. That was the moment the expression on my mother's face crumbled. Her practiced poise faltered into something raw. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. My father didn't even blink. He just stared ahead like someone watching the end of a slow-moving train wreck. Colin? His smirk vanished. He stood up like he might say something, but his lawyer quickly tugged him down by the sleeve. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I just nodded once. The judge turned to me. Miss Donovan, I don't think I need to tell you that Dr. Avery left behind more than just a house or a title. What you've protected here, it's bigger than an inheritance. I swallowed hard. I know, Your Honor. You honored him, in every sense. He gave a final nod and stood. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck once. That was it. It was over. Outside, I stepped into the chill of early spring. I didn't wait for anyone, didn't turn to see if they followed me out. One of the nurses who'd stood behind me during the hearing approached. She looked about my age, maybe a little older, with laugh lines and tired eyes. You don't know me, she said quietly, but I worked with Malcolm for years. I saw what you meant to him. I nodded, not sure what to say. She reached into her coat pocket and handed me a folded paper, a copy of a flyer for the scholarship we dreamed of creating. I kept this, she said. We found it in his locker. He never threw it out. Then after a pause, you didn't just save patients, Dr. Donovan, you saved his legacy. I watched her walk away, the wind tugging at her coat. For the first time in years, I felt the silence in my chest loosen. I hadn't won. I had remembered. And I had restored what mattered. The fallout came fast. Within a week, the town knew everything. Colin's face was all over the local news. Not smiling, not confident, just pale and ducking cameras. The DA's office launched a formal inquiry into the forged will, fraud charges, potential prison time. His employer let him go quietly. The gym membership and car lease went next. His arrogance didn't survive long after that. My parents fared no better. Their names were on the property documents, the wire transfers, the bogus filings. The Hilton Head Villa was frozen, pending investigation. Their social circle shrank overnight. Friends forgot to return calls. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid them. But I didn't watch it happen. Not directly. I had no appetite for revenge. I had work to do. Malcolm's house still smelled like him. Cologne and books and a hint of coffee grounds. The dust on the shelves clung to the past, but I didn't rush to sweep it away. I moved in one room at a time, slowly. Not to take ownership, but to come home. The first room I restored was the study. I left his desk exactly as it was, but I added a new framed photo, me in scrubs, laughing beside a child I'd saved in a Mumbai field hospital. I placed it beside the old one of teenage me, past and present, side by side. The next room was the guest bedroom. I turned it into an office for the Avery Fellowship, a desk, 2 chairs, a shelf lined with medical journals and application forms. I ordered a brass nameplate for the door. Dr. Grace Donovan, Director. It felt right. One afternoon, about a month after the court ruling, a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name in my mother's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I stood in the kitchen for 10 minutes just holding the envelope. Then I sat at the table where Malcolm used to slice oranges and talk about his first patient. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Grace, I don't know how to say this, so I'll just try. I failed you in every way that mattered. I let my pride make choices I can't undo. I let my son, your brother, do something unforgivable, and I said nothing. You deserved more than silence. I'm sorry. I know it's not enough. Mom, no love, no plea for forgiveness, just that. I stared at it for a long time, not angry, not moved, just tired. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer in Malcolm's desk. I didn't burn it, I didn't frame it. I filed it away like a scar, healed but never forgotten. That night, I stood at the upstairs window and looked out over the quiet neighborhood. The porch light flickered. The breeze carried the scent of rain. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing on borrowed ground. This wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning of something I chose, on my terms, in the house that was always mine. The Avery Fellowship launched 3 months later. We kept it local at first, just one student from Edison Falls High. But it was enough. One scholarship, one chance, one open door. Her name was Layla Chen. 17, smart as hell, working 2 jobs, taking care of her little brother while maintaining a 4.2 GPA. She wanted to be a pediatrician. The day I told her she'd been selected, she blinked at me for a solid 10 seconds before whispering, "Are you serious?" When I handed her the acceptance letter, she hugged me like I was the only person in the world who had ever seen her. A week later, she mailed me a note, handwritten. "You saved my life, and I haven't even met you yet." I read it sitting at Malcolm's kitchen table, coffee going cold in my hands. I must have reread it 20 times. I taped it to the fridge next to a faded photo of Malcolm holding up a piggy bank and saying, "We'll call it the Avery Fund, and we'll fill it with hope." I smiled. For once, it wasn't bittersweet, just sweet. The house was almost fully restored by then. The walls were painted, the garden trimmed, the upstairs linen closet reshelved and labeled. I'd even managed to fix the leaky faucet in the downstairs bathroom, the one Malcolm always meant to get around to but never did. I had visitors sometimes. Lena came by every other Saturday for coffee and town gossip. Serena checked in via email with updates about the formal proceedings, Colin's arraignment, the freezing of the Hilton Head property, the pending civil suits. I didn't ask for details. It wasn't my battle anymore. The truth was on record. That was enough. One morning, I pulled on my coat and walked the familiar path to the hospital garden. It was sunny, one of those late spring mornings when everything smells like fresh grass and laundry. The trees around the perimeter were blooming pale pink, and the benches still bore Malcolm's touch. Clean lines, a brass plaque on each. I walked to the corner where his memorial stood. The headstone was simple. Dr. Malcolm R. Avery. He healed more than wounds. I knelt down and laid a stethoscope beside it. Not mine. His. I'd found it in his study drawer the night before, worn smooth at the edges, still smelling faintly of antiseptic and cedar wood. "I didn't let them erase us," I whispered. The breeze picked up just slightly, rustling the branches above. Then I stood, squared my shoulders, and made my way back toward the hospital. The lobby had been renovated since I'd trained there. Brighter lights, new tiles, the smell of lemon polish. But beneath it, everything felt the same. The controlled chaos, the hum of machines, the quiet urgency in every nurse's stride. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor, the pediatric wing, and stood for a moment at the window overlooking the main courtyard. Layla's acceptance ceremony was that afternoon, a small event, mostly local press and hospital staff, but it didn't feel small, not to me. As I looked out over the town, my town now, I thought of every moment that had brought me back, every time I'd walked away from something that hurt, only to return stronger. I stepped out onto the hospital steps just as the sun broke through the clouds. It hit the roof in a flash of gold, then slid across the pavement to meet my feet, and I just stood there for a while, breathing in the warmth, no courtroom, no judgment, no fight, just peace and purpose, and the beginning of something that would last.